Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And I'm Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will, after the next congressional UAP hearing.
That's right. It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely. But even if it's new science and not aliens, woo!
It's a very exciting time.
And just a quick reminder before we get in, if you want to support what we do here, the best way is by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime. And you can find our show notes at and a link to our Discord at veryexcitingtime.com.
That's right. All right. Before we get into it today, Chuck, I had a quick question for you. I think most of our listeners know by now that you're based in Florida. And as I recall, there was some sort of weather phenomena happening down there.
Weather stuff.
Yeah. How are things? Are you guys okay?
Yeah, things are all right here. We are we are at 21 foot above sea level, which is almost halfway to the highest point in Florida, which I think is 54 feet above sea level. But yeah, we did all right. There's some like yard debris and stuff, but it was okay over here. I hear that the people on the beaches are completely wiped out, and that sucks. But also, they're where the mangroves should be, and so if you're gonna be mangroves, you should act like mangroves and block the seas from hitting the inland shore. So I feel very little sympathy. Probably because I don't know any of them, and I would feel a lot more sympathy. But
Now, I mentioned in our last episode that we were feeling a little cursed. I was in a car accident. We had endless recording problems. Since then, Chuck has been through a hurricane. And did you tell me right before we started that you're also recovering from COVID again?
Yes. Yeah. It was very frustrating because this COVID is coming so hot on the heels of the previous bout that my insurance wouldn't even cover it. They're like, no, you are not worth it. And so
you're on your own, buddy.
Yeah. So we got the bill for our Paxlovid, and it was $1,700 for each of us. So it's like $3,400. Like, wow. I don't care that much, but I told my boss that I was going to be out for a while. He's like, hang on, we're going to do some things. I'm going to go yell at some people. And the next day we had a prescription, so I'm very glad. But yeah, so I'm a little sick. You'll hear it in my voice every so often. But
well, fingers crossed for a quick recovery and no more hurricanes. And
right.
Like whoever out there that we have wronged, I am sorry. Please take the pins out of the voodoo doll. Like we'll stop.
But on the plus side, we did get access to new software, which could be so much worse than the old software. I don't know.
So far, it seems okay. And just like we said last week, if you're hearing this, it worked.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Man.
All right.
I really
so I've got sort of a classic grab bag episode for you today. We got a little bit of everything going on. First up, and I don't even have a section in the notes for this. I just wanted to mention it. I've talked a lot about, as a longtime UFO fan. Fan is a weird word to choose. Enthusiast. Chuck doesn't like the word ufologist. Let's go with that. As a long-term ufologist, it still blows my mind to see UFOs being treated as a moderately serious topic for discussion. There's still a little bit of giggle factor, but we seem to have moved beyond the every time anybody mentions UFOs, you have to have jokes about little green men. You have to have references to the X-Files. Maybe they just straight up play the theme music. But like Lue Elizondo has been on a tour, like going around hitting all the big networks. We saw him on CNN. We saw him on ABC. We saw him on News Nation, like going around all the places. But those are all kind of news programs, and this is kind of a newsworthy thing.
Sure.
Honestly, like, this is going to sound dumb, but the one that surprised me the most was Lue Elizondo appeared on The Daily Show.
Oh, yeah. I heard about that, but I haven't seen it. How was it?
It was a really good interview. Ronnie Cheng interviewed him, and he clearly knew the material. He was holding up Lue's book, and it's just full of bookmarks.
Nice.
And he's doing the thing that Jon Stewart also does very well, which is he played dumb.
Okay.
He clearly knew the questions to ask and guided the conversation and gave Lue, the opportunities to hit his talking points. But Ronnie got to lead into it like, hold on. Are you saying there are fucking aliens? Like, can we talk about that? Why aren't we all talking about the aliens?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I still need to watch it. My wife is not so keen to watch it, and fine. I don't know. It's interesting.
It was fine. Yeah. I mean, there's no news for guys like you and me who have talked about his book and everything, but it's just really interesting seeing him hit a totally different audience. And I can tell you that I saw a bunch of people show up on Reddit like, yo, I just saw that Daily Show thing about Lue, and I'm kind of digging into it. Like, is this for real?
Yeah.
Like,
interesting.
People who were not really open to it before.
Is this kind of like, is this the video you would recommend people start on?
I don't know about that. I think what I like about it is it hit a different audience. It wasn't long. It wasn't in depth. It was just enough to see like, hey, this is a real guy who really worked at the Pentagon and has serious, no joke credentials saying this is a real thing. How do I feel about that? In that sense, it's good. There might be other things I'd recommend if you're really trying to like convince someone.
Yeah. Like what? Because I want to convince Erica. I don't know.
Well, okay. I'm gonna put a pin in that.
Okay. Yeah.
We had a little bit of a discussion about this in Discord, and I think around Christmas time we are going to put out a new type of episode. This is probably going to be a new thing that I'm hoping we'll do every year. That's the like onboarding episode.
Okay. Cool.
Like, if you're coming to this topic brand new in 2025, here's what you need to know, because some wild stuff has happened in the last year, right? Like, if we had made this episode last year, it wouldn't have had David Grush in it. Like, we would have talked about Lue Elizondo, and we would have talked about, the 2017 New York Times article and the Tic Tac incident. We'll probably still talk about all those things, but now you can't really have this conversation without bringing up David Grush. So Chuck said something that kind of sparked this idea, and I have been thinking about it ever since. And I really like this idea of, here is the episode. If you want to give this to somebody who's brand new to the topic, who's maybe a little skeptical and unsure of it, but is willing to listen, this is the 45 minutes or an hour long thing that'll kind of like give them the basics of why we can say confidently that UFOs are real. They may not be alien, but they're real. There's something up there, and there are, substantial claims that the government has recovered non-human technology. Where is that claim coming from? Let's get those tent poles in the ground so that we can keep the discussion moving. So
great. I look forward to it.
We'll recommend some stuff in that episode.
Okay.
So the first thing that I want to dive into today is there's a guy named Harald Malmgren. Now, I hadn't heard of this guy, but he's kind of a big deal in political circles. He served as a senior aide to several U.S. presidents, including JFK, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford.
Wow.
And he has served as a strategist and risk advisor for multiple large companies since. And recently he started tweeting about UFOs.
Okay. Cool. Is it so, like, I know there's a thing called Nobel disease where Nobel laureates tend to pick up crazy fringe theories and start talking obsessively about them. Is that this, or is he like actually making some sense? Or?
No idea.
Okay.
I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah.
What I will say is the things he is saying make sense.
Okay.
Other than it's kind of wild to see a guy who's kind of like a serious, hardcore political dude coming out and talking about UFOs. He's telling stories about encounters and meetings he had with people who claim to be involved with UFOs. Okay. So he's not saying he himself saw a UFO or was involved in it. In that sense, it's very believable. But, there's no corroborating evidence or anything.
Yeah. So I wonder
basically, sorry, go ahead.
I wonder if he's sort of like reacting to the general atmosphere sort of like clearing up and just like, hey, I know some weird stuff I can talk about.
I think that's true. Also, his daughter is a kind of highly ranked person at NASA.
Oh, okay.
Which, makes everybody in the UFO community go, huh.
Yeah.
But what's actually happening is he became active on Twitter fairly recently, I believe at the encouragement of his daughter. And he's just kind of sharing anecdotes from his career. And it happens that a few of those are UFO related. So there are 3 tweets in particular I want to talk about. The first one is from back in April. He said, "I was reminded today that I had met and engaged with Jeff Bezos's grandfather at Los Alamos in 1963, when I was the leader of costing the design and build of the first anti-missile defense system for the Joint Chiefs. And I heard from him about his alleged work on reverse engineering of UAP objects."
Okay, wait. So Jeff Bezos' grandfather worked at Los Alamos?
I know. Isn't that funny? I don't think that's supposed to be the primary takeaway, but just like you, I was like, hold up. So yeah, I went and looked it up. Jeff Bezos' grandfather, who, by the way, Bezos talks about all the time. Like if you look up Jeff Bezos' granddad, you find all these stories about Bezos hanging out on his granddad's farm and like learning all these skills from him. But yeah, his grandfather was a guy named Lawrence Preston Geis, or Giese. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And he was a literal rocket scientist who wasn't just working at Los Alamos. He helped found DARPA, the Defense Agency Research Project, something like that. But like the group that like formed the internet and did all the big research stuff for the military. Yeah. This dude founded it.
Yeah. I think there's that there's a difference between ARPA and DARPA, but they're very similar.
Yes, he was involved in founding ARPA. ARPA became DARPA, but I mean, there's a continuity between those programs. It's not totally unrelated.
Anyways, so it sounds like the connection to Bezos is actually unrelated. Fascinating.
Technically, yeah. For guys like you and me, it's like, hold up. But that wasn't really the point of the tweet.
Yeah, okay. So what he's really trying to say is he was at Los Alamos and he met a guy there who was part of the UAP reverse engineering program, which is pretty wild.
Absolutely is. Yeah. So that's pretty awesome. And it gets better. So in August, he tweeted again. He said, 60 plus years ago, I was provided with highest level classifications so I could lead DoD work on nuclear weapons and anti-missile defense. I was informally briefed on otherworld technologies by CIA's Richard Bissell, who had been in charge of Skunk Works, Area 51, Los Alamos, etc., but I was sworn to secrecy.
Okay, there's a lot here. But one of the things that strikes me is that we hear about the secret programs being classified underneath both nuclear technology and then also other things. I wonder if this dude actually has or had all the like classifications necessary.
I believe he did. Yeah. And if you look up Lawrence Preston Geis, he was working at some of the atomic energy agencies as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So I remember David Grush talking about Lockheed being one of the aerospace companies that received crash recoveries. And Skunkworks is their secret projects group, right? Okay. So Malmgren is saying he was briefed by the guy who ran Skunkworks about otherworld technologies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not like direct confirmation of Grush and Elizondo, but like you can kind of connect the threads here. I was briefed by the guy who worked at Skunkworks, and everybody's hearing that Skunkworks has crash recovery. Yeah. Cool. He clarified a few points because, of course, quite a few people were tweeting at him about this. Yeah. He said, Bissell briefed me off the record after his resignation as CIA Deputy Director of Special Ops. I was never directly involved in UAP research. What I learned was sketchy and slightly illuminated by Bissell, as he felt I needed a heads up in case the subject ever came up in my meetings with presidents or others. I swore secrecy to him, not under any law.
Oh, yeah. That's really interesting. I've wondered in the past, like, I suspect that, this 1960s or 50s, I wonder if classification was the same then, or if it was more of a gentleman's agreement kind of thing.
As I understand, it was rapidly evolving, right? Like the CIA was founded in 1947, which UFO conspiracists are always like, the same year as Roswell, but you don't spin up a government agency overnight. It was already in the works. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Much as I love a good conspiracy, that one ain't it.
Yeah.
But I think what he's trying to clarify here when he says I swore secrecy to Bissell not under any law was not there were no laws for me to swear secrecy under. It was more this was an informal thing. He made me promise not to tell anybody, but figured I needed a heads up.
Yeah. And he's dead now.
Wild,
so,
right?
Like, let's go. Okay. So in the thread, did he give any other specific details about like what he was briefed on or anything like that?
Not directly, but just a week or so ago, he tweeted again to somebody who's continuing to ask him UFO questions. And he said, you asked, is there actual recovered NHI tech? And the answer is yes, in several different hands, both government and private hands. For example, knowing such technology has enabled planning for Moon to Mars transportation in days, not years. Whoa. Don't ask me who has such tech.
I mean, I want to ask him who has this tech now.
Well, he already told us Lockheed.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah, this is not going to go great. Okay, so this is fascinating. So Malmgren is like super connected guy across multiple presidential administrations who's now corroborating a ton of stuff about crash retrieval, reverse engineering, especially at Lockheed. That's super exciting.
It really is. I don't know what to make about the claim that the reverse engineering has led to flights from the moon to Mars in 2 days, but just ignoring that part, just going back to, hey, here's a seriously connected guy, like you said, who was briefed 2 different times about crash recovery and reverse engineering efforts. That corroborates Lue Elizondo and David Grush. Now, make of that what you will. As I said, there's no evidence saying that this guy doesn't have, what do you call it, Nobel syndrome or whatever?
Nobel disease.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's a pretty interesting story. And it kind of gets back to what I was saying. Like, this is stuff that would have gotten you laughed out of the room, 20 years ago. And now, not a big deal. You can just talk about it and people take it seriously.
Also, I've always wondered, like he says, knowing this technology enables planning for Moon to Mars transportation.
It's easy to plan
all
things.
Sorts of stuff.
Elon Musk has all sorts of plans.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know. It's interesting though. Cool.
So yeah, moving on to our next topic.
Okay.
We talked in recent episodes. We've been talking a lot about former ATIP director Lue Elizondo's book, and in particular, we've discussed his theory that UAP behave in a way that looks a lot like recon or surveillance activities that we might conduct prior to a military operation, and that informs his perspective that UAP are kind of a potential threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember the colonel from Brazil compared the way they were moving up and down the coast of Brazil to the way we do aerial photography, which makes
Absolutely.
sense.
Yeah. So I saw a couple of comments on Twitter recently that I thought were interesting on this thread, because I've made no secret of the fact that a lot of people are uncomfortable with Lue specifically because of his military background and the fact that he kind of seems to be pushing this threat narrative.
Yeah.
Now, no matter how many times Lue comes out and clarifies, hey, that doesn't mean they're hostile necessarily. It's still something people hear and they get uncomfortable with.
Right.
So Richard Geldreck, who is a software engineer who used to work at SpaceX, tweeted...
Software engineer? I
don't know. He tweeted, "The narrative that UAPs came in the 20th century in order to observe us seems silly. They could have easily used stealth satellite and drones, and we would have been none the wiser. Instead, UAPs made huge visible shows across the entire world repeatedly. That's not scouting. Additionally, if you're scouting in order to prep for later military activity, you certainly don't give your adversary any heads up that you're coming. You don't crash your technology near ground zero, Trinity, Roswell, etc. The pure scouting narrative makes little sense."
What does he mean by you don't crash your tech? Like, isn't a crash always by definition, kind of an accident?
Yeah, the UFO community has some very muddy ideas around the idea of UFO crashes. Now, we've heard from Lue that Roswell was because we were testing EMPs, and that caused the disks to crash unintentionally. But there are other narratives out there that say that Roswell and maybe others were not so much crashes as gifts. There are references from, I believe David Grush said that they sometimes found craft just parked, like door open, keys in the ignition kind of thing, like in a way that made it very hard to see it as anything other than here you go. Yeah. And I think a lot of people have difficulty with the idea of technology that is advanced enough to come from wherever they come from, and then they get here and crash in the desert. Now, we've talked a lot about this over the time. Airline crashes are not common, but they happen. And if you're looking at UFO crash and you're going, my God, they're falling out of the sky left and right. Well, they're not actually. But maybe there's so many of them that a small fraction of natural accidents is still enough to look like, oh my God, they're everywhere. So all of that is to say, there is some kind of muddiness around the idea of crashes. So when he says you don't crash your technology, I think what he's getting at is this idea of if you're planning a military action, you don't give them access to your technology.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think Hanlon's razor still applies to? It makes me wonder if we're just like a planet that's a little bit off of some like hyperspace shipping route, and every so often people are just like, I gotta get gas, and they like pop out and accidentally crash into the planet or whatever. Yeah.
So it's funny you say that. There are lots of people who think that water worlds are not very common, and water is going to be the easiest fuel for ships. So you stop off at the nearest water world and you fly into the ocean, fill up your reservoir, and move on. They don't care about
love water.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so the second question I had is. Were these, he mentions crashing technology near ground zero. Were they ground zero before the crash?
No, and that's exactly right. Yeah, okay. Right. Like we think of Roswell as ground zero because it was the first big one, but like it retroactively became ground zero. It wasn't ground zero before that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And what do you think he meant by huge visible shows?
Yeah. Now here's the thing. Chuck and I try very hard not to fall into the skeptic and believer side of things. I am, not quite all the way into true believer territory. Chuck is definitely not all the way into absolute skeptic territory. Right. We're both closer to the middle than it looks like. But this is one of those things where even I'm kind of like, I don't know about huge visible shows.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people have still never seen a UFO.
Yeah.
Like, yes, there have been big, well-documented incidents, Phoenix Lights, Colaris, things like that. But I don't think that rises to the level of huge visible shows. But if I can try to give the guy some credit, I believe his broad point is there are decades of well-documented sightings.
Okay.
And if you accept that those are non-human, they don't seem to be particularly covert like you might expect from a military-style surveillance.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. And to their point, maybe it's not military. It could be scientific. We don't try and hide the helicopters we use to monitor migration patterns of endangered animals, nor do we hide the satellites we use for Earth observation. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah. So broadly speaking, I think the point he's making that I think is valid is if it is, as Lue says, surveillance style activities with kind of a military bent, it's a weird way to go about it because it seems fairly visible and they're not particularly trying to hide.
Yeah, makes sense.
He got a reply from Darren King, who you may know as Exo Academian, who has another excellent podcast out there. Okay. And he said, yeah, this is yet another reason why the notion that what we're seeing amounts to decades-long reconnaissance mission by NHI prior to some kind of invasion is deeply flawed.
Invasion? Who's been talking about this?
No one really. And this is exactly my frustration, right? Lue using the word threat muddies the water here.
Yeah.
In the halls of the Pentagon, it makes perfect sense.
Totally.
Threat is understood as just, hey, our job is to monitor threats and be prepared to address them. And no matter how many times Lue uses that analogy of, hey, if you stand downwind of a jet engine, that is absolutely a threatening environment. It's not hostile. The jet isn't trying to hurt you.
The
you
jet
just are in a bad
you.
place.
Yeah.
But most people conflate those two. When you talk about a threat, most people are going to hear it as hostility. And I get the pushback here.
Yeah.
But I think it is worth pushing back on the pushback because however you feel about the threat narrative, it is undeniable that what they're doing looks like surveillance. It's really hard to interpret it in any other way. Maybe not, as you pointed out, maybe not military surveillance, but it sure looks like they're looking at us,
Yeah. I think last time we talked about the problem of anthropomorphizing our friends from out of town. We definitely can say they seem to be interested in nukes, water, and military stuff, but we have no idea why. For all we know, they could be trying to figure out how to read camouflage, thinking that's how we communicate to each other.
They're like, I don't get it. These guys are wearing all these like clothes with green and brown blobs. It must mean something.
Is this a mating coloring? Like, what's happening? How did?
Oh man, yeah. So anyway, I didn't want to get too into the weeds here, but I think it was important to acknowledge because we've been talking so much about Lue. And Lue is a controversial figure. And Lue is controversial for a number of dumb reasons, as we've talked about. The whole thing of whether or not he ran the Pentagon UFO program. Okay, it fucking settled, guys. Move on. But there is room to be frustrated by his military background and focus on a threat narrative. Absolutely. Sure. I understand why people are uncomfortable with that. But I wanted to make sure that we were representing that side of the conversation since we'd spent so much time talking about Lue.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay. Now, speaking of Lue, while he was promoting his book, he appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he said something really interesting.
Okay.
He said, there is a high resolution video of, I can't say what platform it was taken from. I can't say where it was taken from, but an object that, do you know how large an offshore oil derrick is? They're huge, right? They're almost like a small city, right? They're like one city block. They're huge, enormous things. And there's a video that shows one of these objects underwater that goes by. The speed was calculated between 450 and 550 knots underwater. And it was bigger than the offshore derrick that it was passing, because you could see in the video the offshore derrick, and you could see this thing zip right by it.
Wow. 500 knots?
That sounds fast. Is that fast? I don't know what knots are. Is it like tying knots in a rope?
Yeah, exactly. It is super duper fast. You can usually substitute knots for miles per hour and get kind of in the right area. So we're talking 500 miles an hour underwater, fast. Which is pretty quick.
How fast do our fast things go?
Yeah, so I did some research on this. The fastest nuclear submarine in the world goes 45 knots, which is pretty brisk.
Okay.
But we are doing, there has been like active development since the 80s on a thing called supercavitation, where this is like actually super fascinating to me, where the front of an object is shaped in just the right way to make an air bubble around the thing. And then you can have a missile underwater, complete with like flame and everything, that's all in that bubble. And the only thing touching water is that little bit in the front.
Oh, that's wild.
So those will go up to 500 knots. But those underwater missiles are tiny, like tiny compared to an oil rig. So, that's crazy huge.
So what I'm hearing you say is we can make little teeny tiny things that can abuse physics and go very, very fast underwater. But our big things that go underwater, like nuclear submarines, go 10 times slower than this thing was supposed to be going. Okay.
Yeah, and I think if something that large was using supercavitation, I think that the oil derrick the video was shot from would have been exploded in like
you would
water.
know.
You'd know. So that's really weird.
Now here's what's interesting. So Elizondo says this on Joe Rogan. Shortly thereafter, our good friend Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who we did an episode on, said, "For my ocean science and technology colleagues, if this sounds too fantastic to be true, I can confirm it from other credible sources. And both the USS Maury and the USCG Bittersweet had similar encounters in the Pacific and Atlantic at the end of World War II.
Wow. So this guy is just like begging to get called on to go to the UAP hearing, right?
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that because let's talk about the upcoming UAP hearings in Congress.
All right. Very exciting.
Yeah. So a few weeks ago, Senator Gillibrand confirmed that we will see a Senate UAP hearing in September. She said, yes, I have it on the schedule.
I feel like she's running out of time since we've got, one day?
It was a few weeks ago. We haven't heard an update from her. And, as you can imagine, Congress has some other stuff going on.
I suppose there are some other things. All right.
So I don't know, maybe it was closed doors. I think more likely it got delayed. But Gillibrand was quoted as saying, this is a priority for me, because I think it's very important that we continue to make things publicly available, give a progress report on how many UAP we've assessed and analyzed, give examples of what we have identified, and give examples of what we haven't identified, so that the community can be kept up to speed about what we're actually doing and what this office, meaning AARO, is doing. We also want to continue to build credibility within this office so more of the public can feed in sightings and have a place and a platform to send information and inquiries, because that's eventually what this office is supposed to do.
So I'm struck by two things. First, she's referring to it with we, which says to me that she's taking more of an active hand than maybe she had in the past.
Maybe it's hard to tell. Maybe that's just kind of the general rule when you're talking about Congress. Nobody ever does anything alone.
Yeah. All right.
She is the head of a subcommittee, so maybe she means the subcommittee.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And so this sounds like another AARO status report, but I think you were saying in Lue's book, he said even having a declassified report at least acknowledges that there's something worth studying, which is interesting. So
it's totally fair. And it kind of speaks to how good we have it now that you and I can hear like, oh, it's just going to be another like AARO status report, whatever. Yeah. That's not really interesting. But like actually, 5 years ago, we've been like, holy shit, they're going to talk about UFOs.
Yeah.
We've gotten a little spoiled.
Yeah, we have.
I will say, she mentioned that she wanted to talk to the new head of AARO because since she has spoken last, Kirkpatrick has departed. There's a new guy running it. So I think this is kind of an opportunity for her to check in and kind of see how's the program doing under your new leadership and stuff.
Yeah. So hang on. There's a new director officially. Have we we haven't talked about that. Can we talk about that?
That's a good point. We haven't talked about it on the show. We've chatted about it a little bit in Discord. I was a little hesitant to talk about it. I feel like we were talking about Kirkpatrick so much, and we were both so annoyed with him that it felt like every other week we were like, oh, fucking Kirkpatrick is at it again. So there's a new guy, and I kind of wanted to give him a chance to shake out.
Okay. Makes sense.
Now, we still don't know anything about the new guy and how he will run AARO. Maybe after Gillibrand grills him in Congress, we'll get a little insight into that. But we have had some intriguing insight into him.
Okay.
So stepping back, last month, the Pentagon released a statement announcing the new director of AARO. They said, today, Dr. John T. Kozlowski arrived on detail from the National Security Agency to be appointed as the director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Dr. Kozlowski brings extensive experience working in multiple scientific fields, including quantum optics and crypto mathematics, as well as leading mission-oriented research and analysis teams. Under his leadership, AARO will continue to examine the U.S. government historical record related to UAP, meaning the second half of that report, as well as efforts to declassify and release UAP-related records to the greatest extent possible.
Wow. There's actually a really huge amount of info in that I kind of want to unpack, but I'm instead going to say something entirely different. I don't know anything about quantum optics or crypto mathematics, but they sound super impressive.
Except the word crypto has been poisoned for me. All I hear is Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what it is, but
I mean, yeah, I would like to believe that it's cryptozoology, but being NSA, probably not.
He's just really into Bigfoot, guys.
Yeah, really super into it. It's probably cryptographics, but let's hope it's not cryptocurrency. So, okay, what else do we know about this guy? This is exciting, though.
We don't know much about him. Obviously that was a press release. They're going to talk about his credentials.
Hang on. I want to go back. Sorry. The press release from the Pentagon talked about declassifying and releasing UAP records to the greatest extent possible. I feel like the Pentagon of several months ago was not interested in that. Do you think? Is this a change?
Here's the problem.
Or is, I guess those are weasel words.
Releasing UAP-related records doesn't mean, hey, you guys, it's real. It is entirely possible for that to be a statement from a debunking organization standpoint, where if we believe that there is upstream pressure on AARO and formerly on Dr. Kirkpatrick to debunk, then yes, absolutely, you should be declassifying and releasing stuff. But there's a strong idea of what you should be declassifying and releasing. And to that point, the things AARO has declassified have all been easily debunked cases.
I see.
Which gets back to why Congress had some very particular language in there about AARO's annual report, where they were like, yo, we don't want to hear about the stuff you identified. That stuff should be reported on to other places. If you figured out it was a Russian jet, that should be reported to the DoD. You know, like that's not for the UAP report. Yeah. Similarly, if it's atmospheric phenomena or floating trash, we don't want to hear about that. Yeah. We want to hear about the unidentified stuff. Yeah. They have interpreted that as, hey, you guys, we figured out this one was the lights from a faraway jet. And hey, we had this weird sample of metal and we sent it to the lab that coincidentally Dr. Kirkpatrick now works at. And it turns out it's just plain old aluminum, guys. Nothing to see here. Probably a shell of a missile casing. Like, yes, the press release says we're going to try to declassify stuff. It doesn't actually mean anything unless you know what their intent is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's get back to the new guy.
Yeah. So Liberation Times wrote about this. They said, sources say that Dr. Kozlowski is showing promising signs of adopting a new approach to the UAP topic, particularly in investigations related to allegations of retrieval and reverse engineering programs involving materials and biologics of non-human intelligence or unknown origin. However, it is still too early to predict the direction Dr. Kozlowski will take.
Yeah, I mean, it is early. I feel like we had promising signs at the beginning of Kirkpatrick too. So
yeah,
I don't want to hold my breath quite yet.
No, totally. And if you go back and listen to some of our early episodes when AARO was just getting spun up, we tried to be very optimistic about it. And Kirkpatrick was coming out and talking about, hey, I'm setting up this organization and I'm hiring scientists and I've built these two branches that are designed to interrogate questions together. Our goal is to quickly debunk the easily debunked ones and then focus on the big ones. It all sounded very promising. We got soured on him later when we saw what he was actually doing. But this is why we're kind of skeptical of press releases. Right. But there's some more encouraging quotes I've got here. First of all, Jay Stratton, who we've talked about a lot in recent episodes. He is the co-founder of the OSAP program. He was the former director of the UAP task force. Lue Elizondo talked about handing off responsibility for the ATIP program to him when he left the Pentagon, and that they were doing this kind of tag team inside-outside thing. So Jay Stratton, good guy. We like him. We trust him. He was quoted recently as saying, the good news is I got a text a few weeks ago from a good friend of mine who was part of the UAP task force, John Kozlowski. And he said, I just got the AARO job. Kozlowski is good. He's trustworthy. And hopefully he can carry on my legacy.
Okay. So Kozlowski was on the task force, on UAP task force. And Stratton liked him. Like, okay, now I'm actually getting a little bit hyped up.
Yeah. And I think it's worth pointing out that those are two different promising signs. One, that he was on the UAP task force at all. Is good. It wasn't huge. Those guys were handpicked. But B, that Stratton liked him, because it's possible that they worked together and Stratton was like, this guy was a mistake. I regret hiring him.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But I think you're going to like this next quote even more. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the former director of AARO, was quoted as saying, I've never heard of Kozlowski, nor ever worked with him.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's actually a point in his favor as well then, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But more to the point, our good friend Chris Mellon, oldest fan of the podcast, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, said, quote, I had the pleasure of spending several hours this week with AARO's new director, Dr. John Kozlowski. Kudos to the officials at the DoD and the IC who were involved in selecting Dr. Kozlowski for this important position. If my first impression proves accurate, everyone interested in UAP has a reason to feel optimistic about a more informative, open-minded, productive, and transparent future for that office.
Wow. Whew. What is this feeling? I'm all tingly. Could it be hope?
Right? Fingers crossed, man.
Yeah.
So anyway, detour over.
Okay.
AARO has a new director. Senator Gillibrand wants to meet with him. That's going to be the Senate hearing that is happening in September, but probably not. So moving on. We've also got hearings coming up in the House. Representative Luna said, quote, Nancy Mace is for sure going to be chairing the next one.
Okay. Who's Nancy Mace? I don't recall the name.
Sure. You may not remember the name, but you'll probably remember the question she asked at the last UAP hearing, the one that David Grush was asked. She's the one who asked Grush, did you recover non-human bodies from these crash recoveries? And he said, yes, biologics were recovered. So she was asking very pointed, intentional questions.
Yeah, great. So she's going to be chairing this one. That's great. Let's give her a big old pulpit to ask those kinds of tough questions.
Absolutely. Representative Burchett kind of echoed your thoughts. He said, I think Mace really has a grasp of the issue. She asked the tough questions last time. She has a history with this, and she's known in the UAP UFO community.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Representative Mace confirmed that the hearing would be held on November 13th.
Oh, wait. So November, why not? Isn't there a month in between September and November?
Yeah. You might remember we talked about this last time. Congress takes off the entire month of October.
Oh, right. Yeah, they they have to have time to prep their Halloween costumes. I get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I heard Burchett is going as the scariest thing he can imagine.
Oh, what's that, Chuck?
A dadgum cover-up.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Such a dumb joke. I love it.
So good. Representative Burchett asked what he hoped he would get out of another UAP hearing, said exposure. And I think we'll get some good quality witnesses in. And I think more whistleblowers will come in because we're serious. And I think that'll lay the groundwork for the next president to do what's right with this.
Okay. I like the sound of that. I also like that it might encourage Biden to do some wild things on the way out that he might not have been able to get away with before.
I'm not going to hold my breath on that account. Representative Luna, when asked about witnesses, said simply, you guys will be happy.
Thanks, tease.
Representative Mace, when asked about witnesses, said, I wanted to have a military veteran. I think it's important to have more than just academics. I need people who have maybe seen some shit and can tell us some stuff.
Oh, I like it. Never heard of a senator curse before.
Yeah.
Senator, Congress. Sorry.
Representative. Yeah. So bringing it all back to, we were talking about Rear Admiral Gallaudet, who is clearly kind of angling to get invited, said, quote, yesterday I was invited to testify on UAP disclosure before the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Accountability in November. I'm not sure if Congress will pass the UAP Disclosure Act, sponsored by Leader Schumer and Senator Rounds, but I will make a case for it based on the right of the American people to know that we are not alone and the national security implications of that astonishing reality.
Oh, that is so well written. Like, I cannot wait for this hearing. That's going to be so good.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, with regards to the UAP Disclosure Act that he mentioned, less good news on that front. So to kind of recap, back in July, we learned that Senator Rounds and Senate Majority Leader Schumer, who had originally written it, revived their UAP Disclosure Act for the 2025 NDAA. They were hoping to restore all the parts that were gutted from the version that was passed in 2024, including the Presidential Review Board and the eminent domain clauses.
Okay. And didn't we find out that AARO is behind a lot of the pushback?
Yeah, Kirkpatrick was weirdly proud of this fact. He was very clear that Because the NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act, the Pentagon gets a review of it and they can give some feedback on it. And because AARO is the Pentagon's UFO department, they got to look at the UAP section in the NDAA, and they came back and redlined the part about the UAP board, review board in particular, claiming it was redundant with AARO.
Yeah, it's a reaction to you. Yeah, it is redundant. You should be redlined. Sorry.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, this year, the UAP didn't even get to the point where the Pentagon could start objecting. Douglas Dean Johnson reported that the Senate's version of the NDAA does not include the UAP Disclosure Act. It was also not in the House version. He said, quote, "This spells the end for the UAPDA in the current Congress. For whatever reason, the UAPDA did not achieve the degree of consensus necessary to make it into the omnibus bipartisan manager's amendment, which means that the UAPDA will not even be an issue in this year's House-Senate negotiations that will produce the final fiscal year 2025 NDAA later this year."
Yeah, I mean, that's a bummer. You've been kind of leading up to that, so I'm not super surprised with the election going on and everything, but it's still a bummer.
Absolutely. And we got several quotes kind of along that lines. Lester Nair, who is the founder of the UAP caucus, commented, "The failure of the UAPDA in 2024 is disappointing, but not entirely unexpected, given the complexities of the current election cycle, the political dynamics within the 118th Congress, and persistent pushback from institutional gatekeepers. While this setback is significant, it does not mark the end of our efforts towards greater transparency in UAP-related matters."
Awesome. I'm glad they're not giving up.
Yep. Liberation Times said that the UAPDA failed, quote, "due to resistance from Senator Rand Paul."
What? We haven't talked about him before. Has he been opposed to UFO stuff in the past?
Not that I know of. It was kind of weird, and it came out of nowhere. And even weirder, Liberation Times later issued an update saying, quote, "After initially declining to comment on the record via email, a staffer from Senator Rand Paul's office states, Senator Paul cleared that amendment, so any delay was not due to his actions."
Oh, interesting.
Then later, The Good Trouble Show shared, "We found out from a source that Mitch McConnell, not Rand Paul, blocked the amendment's inclusion in the NDAA. The legislation may make it through in other ways. There is still hope."
Ugh, fucking McConnell. That guy can't retire fast enough.
Yeah, 100% agreed.
But what do they mean there's still hope?
Well, so this is the most interesting quote of all. Ask Paul managed to catch up with Senator Rounds, and he was a little hesitant to comment on it, but he said, "Let me put it this way. The NDAA is not out yet. Negotiations continue."
Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. Like, it makes sense. Like,
yeah, it ain't over till it's over.
Yeah, it ain't over. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, man, it's been a weird couple of weeks. This is the stuff that's been going on in the background while we've been talking about Lue Elizondo. We got, a big former policy guy coming out talking about UFOs, kind of confirming David Grush's allegations about Lockheed getting crash recovery. We've got some debate over Lue Elizondo's idea that UFOs are performing sort of military-style reconnaissance. We've got a Senate UAP hearing coming where they're going to talk to the new head of AARO. And we've got a House UAP hearing coming where they're going to talk to Tim Gallaudet, among others. So yeah, exciting times, I think.
Somehow I didn't actually connect that the Senate and the House hearings were separate objects. That's really cool. Also, the House one is right near my birthday. So I really hope that they're going to deliver some good presents.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And they did confirm that, like last time, it will be a public hearing and it'll be like live streamed. So anybody who wants to watch it can watch it. So I don't know.
Yeah. So we don't know when Senate is going to do theirs, but it would have to be in November also, right?
Yeah, they're also on recess in
Okay.
October. So unless she's coming in to do it on Monday, it's probably going to be, in November also, if it hasn't been delayed entirely. Okay. But as we spoke about, while any progress is good news, and getting to see Kozlowski talk about how he's going to run AARO would be useful. Mm-hmm. I'm a lot less interested in a status report from AARO than I am in the House style hearings where they're trying to bring in witnesses and convince more people in Congress that this is a topic that's worth prioritizing. And maybe that'll lead to the UAPDA maybe sneaking in under the wire in this year's NDAA. You never know.
Yeah, you never know.
Cool. All right. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our Discord and social media accounts.
And you can feel free to email us at Scott or Chuck at veryexcitingtime.com. And if you'd like to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
That's right. And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.